Our story this morning comes from the Reverend Dr. Forrest Church. He was my minister at All Souls before he died. Cathedral of the World. Imagine awaking one morning from a deep and dreamless sleep to find yourself in the nave of a vast cathedral. Like a child newborn, untutored, save to moisture, nurture, rhythm, and the profound comforts at the heart of darkness. You open your eyes upon a world unseen, indeed unimaginable before. It is a world of light and dancing, shadow, stone and glass, life and death. The second birth, at once miraculous and natural, is in some ways not unlike the first. A new awakening. It consecrates your life with sacraments and pain you do not understand, and promise joy you will never fully call your own. Such awakenings may happen only once in a lifetime, or many times. But when they do, what you took for granted before is presented as a gift, difficult, yet precious and good. Not that you know what to do with your gift, or even what it really means, only how much it matters. Awakening to the call, stirring deep within you, the call of life itself, the call of God, you begin your pilgrimage. Before you do, look about you, contemplate the mystery and contemplate with awe. This cathedral is as ancient as humankind. Its cornerstone, the first altar, marked with the tincture of blood and stained with tears. Search for a lifetime, which is all you are surely given, and you shall not know its limits. Visit all its transepts, worship at its myriad shrines, nor span its celestial ceiling with your gaze. The buildings have worked from time immemorial, destroying and creating, confounding and perfecting, tearing down and raising up arches in this cathedral. Buttresses and chapels, organs and theaters, chancels and transepts, gargoyles, idols, and icons. Not a moment passes without work being begun that shall not be finished in the lifetime of the architects who planned it, the patrons who paid for it, the builders who constructed, or the expectant worshipers. Throughout human history, one generation after another has labored lovingly, sometimes fearfully, crafting memorials and consecrating shrines. Untold numbers of these collect dust in long, undisturbed chambers. Others, cast centuries or eons ago from their once respected places, lie shattered in shards or ground into powder on the cathedral floor. Not a moment passes without the dreams of long-dead dreamers being outstripped, shattered or abandoned, giving way to new visions, each immortal in reach, ephemeral in grasp. Welcome to the Cathedral of the World. Above all else, contemplate the windows. In the Cathedral of the World, there are windows without number, some long forgotten, covered with patinas of grime, others revealed by millions, the most sacred of shrines. Each in its own way is beautiful. Some are abstract, others representational, some dark and meditative, others bright and dazzling. Each window tells a story about the creation of the world, the meaning of history, the purpose of life, the nature of humankind, the mystery of death. The windows of the cathedral are where the light shines through. Because a cathedral is so vast, our time so short, and our vision so dim, over the course of our pilgrimage, we are able to contemplate only a tiny part of the cathedral, explore a few abscisses, reflect upon the play of darkness and light through a few of its windows. Yet, by pondering and acting on our ruminations, we discover insights that will invest our days with meaning. A 21st century theology based on the concept of one light and many windows offers its adherents both breadth and focus, honoring multiple religious approaches. It only excludes the truth claims of absolutists. That is because fundamentalists claim that the light shines through their window only. Skeptics draw the opposite conclusion. Seeing the bewildering variety of windows and observing the folly of the worshippers, they conclude there is no light. But the windows are not the light. They're where the light shines through. We shall never see the light directly, only as refracted through the windows of the cathedral. Prompting humility, life's mystery lies hidden. The light is veiled, yet being halfway in size between the creation itself and our body's smallest constituent part that we can encompass with our minds, the universe that encompasses us is a cause for great wonder. Awakened by the light, we stand in the cathedral, trembling with awe. Hey all, thanks Nikki. Again, I swear to God that I did not pick those readings after I realized my friend was in the hospital. It's days like that remind me why I believe in the Holy Spirit. And that's powerful. There's a truth to being reminded of those lessons around mindfulness. We're not in control. And you know, the old adage of one day at a time is perennial. Okay, I'm gonna breathe. I was watching one of the outtakes for The Daily Show that came out a couple of years ago, and the host, Trevor Noah, for those that are familiar with it, was talking about how history was taught in his birth home of South Africa and how that differed from his time in the UK. He was talking about how in South Africa, history described the British as invaders. And I've told this story once before, I think. Invaders who had guns going up against Afrikaans who didn't have guns. But when he was in the UK, he heard about those same British soldiers being described as heroes. The old truism that history is made up by the victors may not go far enough in some cases. There's a risk in the stories we tell and the stories we start to believe when they come from only one perspective. Challenge of meaning. We're looking all this month at what it would mean to be a people of mindfulness. We'll try to, well, the month is ending, so we've looked at it every angle we're going to look at with this Sunday. And this week, we're doing a deep dive into our fourth principle, which calls for a responsible search for truth and meaning. A responsible search for truth and meaning. Today we'll look at uncertainty. Often we think of uncertainty in the negative. Confidence is our national hero, and uncertainty is wishy-washy, flip-flopping, and indecisive. On the contrary, I think uncertainty is the only way we get to truth. I think it's safe to say that uncertainty is central to our faith. Often in Western thought, faith is understood to mean belief. But as Unitarian Universalists, we tend to translate it to mean more of a positive, forward-moving orientation toward life, what moves us or what calls us. I have long believed faith is what we call an orientation to life. As UUs, we're never going to agree on all things theological, especially if we try to think of theology in terms of beliefs to follow. That's not going to work for us easily or well. Our faith is more focused on our shared commitments and convictions. At our best, religion helps us to appreciate the times of joy when they come, make sense of the despair that will find its way into our lives from time to time, while knowing we're never truly left alone to deal with it. And the beauty of our faith, throughout all our intellectualism, all our critique and challenge, part of it recognizes that there's no one way to understand the world that's absolutely correct. On our best days, we thrive on multiplicity of perspective. Our neat rows on Sunday morning, when we have rows in person on Sunday mornings, are filled with folks who each hold a different view from the next. Shocking, I know. That's us. We seek to reflect the breadth of human experience without placing it in a box, cataloged and pinned. Follow Unitarian Universalism far enough down the road, and eventually it asks us, to paraphrase the late Roger Ebert on a wholly different topic, to surrender more completely to the underlying mystery of the story, our story. Surrender more completely to the underlying mystery of the story. We point to a central awe at the heart of our lives, and we struggle to name it as best and sometimes as worst as we can. Meditation on mindfulness can bring us there. A dedication to God can bring us there. Compassion for the simple sake of compassion can bring us there. What we call it or what discipline we use matters much less than the openness to a sense of wonder in our lives. Openness, mindfulness, reverence. You'll hear me preach on it almost every week. Probably every week, I just don't always say it. It's what we're about. It's this sense that I try to keep in mind when we talk about some of our principles. Take the fourth, for example, where we covenant to affirm and promote the responsible search for truth and meaning. What does I'm sorry. I just got a message that another friend is in the hospital. What does, I'm sorry, I'm gonna just try to keep going. What does a responsible search even mean? Intellectually honest, kindness in our speech, especially when we disagree. It also means we're open-minded, we're paying attention, that we allow ourselves to be amazed by life, a life we did nothing of our own to be born into. When we move the center of our search, of our quest, back to a place of wonder and respect. I think this is the central challenge for our religious faith over the past 60 years, since the merger between Unitarian and Universalism around 1960. For those new to UU, here's a quick primer on our history. We as a religious people wrestled with the mind and the heart. We combined the cool rigors of our Unitarian forebears with the passion and verve of our Universalist predecessors. Both traditions had members with more of the traits of the other as well, but the religions had a tendency toward one or the other. Painting a broad swath, one could say they both had a style to them, mind and heart. Over 400 years ago, Unitarianism came up. Mind and heart is wrestling right now. Over 400 years ago, Unitarianism came about in Eastern Europe, where it first gained a foothold. while also developing parts of Western Europe where it wouldn't solidify, however, for a while. Impassioned preachers, these Unitarians certainly were, but their arguments and concerns were rooted in the rise of scientific honesty and intellectual cohesion at the expense of valuing adherence to doctrine. Simply put, they made sense, and they got most worked up when they didn't make sense. They were looking to live into a faith that respected the truths with lowercase t's and the truths with uppercase t's. Not that they weren't very heartfelt in their convictions, but their ultimate concerns theologically wrestled with the realm of the consistent mind. It first had to be right up here. Universalism, on the other hand, was an American creation at around 1800. It was an emotional reaction to the fire and brimstone preaching of the times. All of you who have been in a new member class during my tenure will have heard this. Their great critique was rooted in the heart, even if it also made intellectual sense. How can an all-loving God condemn anyone to everlasting pain and suffering? Their answer was, God wouldn't. For sure, the theologians coached their arguments in logic and scripture, but at the root, their concerns were less about doctrinal consistencies and more about how our theologies reflect the God we know in our lives. It's as if they were saying, the God I know loves us. How could you say anything to the contrary? For the Universalists, the notion of hell was an insult to a divine, compassionate God. Their theologies were about the heart. So starting about 60 years ago, we began our great struggle of sorting through these conflicting theological impulses. The two denominations had their own conversations prior to that as well, particularly among their respective youth groups. But up to that point, it was always a discussion between denominations, not within the same. Are we going to focus more on making sure we can all agree? Or is that besides the point, now that we're in a truly non-creedal tradition? Fun fact, it was our youth groups that brought our denominations together. They merged first and the rest of us followed. Youth are always leading in our faith. How can we make our deeds match our thoughts while living true to our hearts? What do we do when each of us have different concerns we put to the forefront? Our histories and backgrounds are very often far apart, yet we struggle to find a common language. We're gonna have a congregational meeting in an hour, and I'm sure there'll be things that we bring up that we don't all agree on. And the reality that our common faith calls us to disagree with love keeps us together. It's not empty, it's not light, it's probably the most important thing we could ever learn or teach our kids. And we're gonna do it again and again, because that's where we are. Our minds and our hearts are in conflict with one another theologically sometimes, and it sometimes causes us unease and pain from the disconnect. And remember, when I use the word theological, I simply mean how we find or make meaning in the world. Those are not my words. Seminarian professor of mine taught them, Dr. James Cone, the father of liberation theology in the world. How we find or make meaning in the world. We get frustrated for the lack of a common language, or we lament the loss of ease of creedal certitudes, even while never wanting to return to them. We came here, or we stayed here, in part for this reason. But wouldn't it just be so much easier if we could simply state how we wrap up the complexity of the universe in one neat little elevator speech? Here's my elevator speech. You've heard it before, and if you don't have one and you need one, please write these down. We're a covenantal faith which means we place a greater concern on our shared commitments with the people and world around us, our shared relations, than we do on the beliefs we hold at any moment. Ideally, our pews, for the lack of a better word, chairs, reflect the diversity of experience and views in our community. In other words, we seek to reflect living experience. We'll never all agree on everything, and our spirituality needs to match that reality. When folks ask, how can we have a religion when we don't all agree? I remind people that we have a planet, we have a world where this is the case. We don't all agree. And yet we need to learn to live together through the difference. Happy Earth Day. This challenge and this vocation is our faith. That's the end of the elevator speech. Hope you got all that down. I feel like UUs are called to bear the burden of not having an easy answer. That's a challenge of meaning. We keep the space in human conversations around meaning for incertitude, for complexity, for nuance, and for doubt. On our better days, we also keep the space for relations, networks, justice building, and integrity. We could likely come up with neat definitions for all these latter virtues, but no definition in the world would ever truly explain what we mean. Much like the truism that defining love is to miss the point, we can't define justice. We can simply live it or risk speaking a hollow echo. We can't define relations. They're only realized in action, in living them. The mind can take us pretty far, but the mind can't live the reality. It can only describe it. That's where the heart comes in. That's also where the pain comes in. Showing you my pain today. And certainly, uncertainty leaves room for real truth to flourish. Uncertainty leaves room for real truth to flourish. One frequent theological challenge for us is the idea of God. We have many books we draw wisdom from, but we have no source that tells us what to think, what to feel exactly about this concept or this experience. And I'll say concept or experience because some of us in this room view God as an idea, and some of us view God as an experience. And this is likely true whether or not we believe in God. There will be atheists who encounter God through heartfelt experience, and there will be theists who only see God as a concept in their minds. I recall the UU minister whose story we heard earlier, the Reverend Dr. Forrest Church, who's my minister before he died, would often quip, "Tell me about the God you don't believe in. I probably don't believe in him either." Uncertainty makes room for people to encounter one another, their beliefs, their faiths, in all their complexity. There's a Jewish parable that teaches that what's the exact wording? God looks more favorably on, God prefers, God appreciates, some positive. The atheist who doesn't believe in God, who lives a righteous life, than the theist who doesn't live a righteous life. One of our oldest religions teaches us that belief is secondary to right action. On our worst days, we UUs can be guilty of idolatry of the mind and the heart, being guilty of a sort of creedalism, the kind that claims that we know best the truths of life and no one has any capacity to better inform us. We raise up our egos or our pain as little gods and thereby close ourselves off to the world. We do it too. We do. We limit our ability to encounter and play in the same reality as the rest of humanity when we lift up our own worldview to the exclusion of the rest. Our faith tradition teaches us not to do this. Fundamentalism of the mind and hearts shut tight are against our religious values. They are. Or they're at least challenges UUs hope to help Unitarian Universalism hopes to help us grow through, or for some of us to heal from. Some of it's been harm done to us, and that's real too. I feel that I believe that Unitarian Universalist offers a saving message here. Whatever our well-informed opinion helps us to understand about whatever facet of the world we currently are considering with our minds or hearts. Unitarian Universalism calls us to tread upon that facet lightly. We ought to engage, or wrestle, or dream, but we ought not to come to understand our opinions as facts. We all saw what the last 5 years has done to our world by understanding opinions as facts. We ought not to confuse perception with universal truth. We can be wrong. We ought not to demand those around us obey our take on a given issue or concern, whether this be about the nature of the holy or which political parties offer the best solution to a given problem or the best way to run this congregation. And we'll be deciding that again at the congregational meeting in an hour, or which exact track we must take to liberate this world from injustice. Unitarian Universalism challenges us to break apart the idols we craft our opinions into, whether those opinions are about thoughts or feelings. Our faith may not offer us easy answers, but it does try to save us from the hard, unwavering rules we so often create for ourselves. It does free us to question and to wonder, never fully knowing we don't know. It does free us to be nimble with life. Faith is a religious world describing how we orient ourselves toward living. I feel that Unitarian Universalism calls us to orient our living with a certain amount of wanderlust, a certain amount of being comfortable with uncertainty, and a deep sense of caring for the life around us. In short, the questions matter. The answer is never better than just good enough for now, though. May we ever seek to have our minds a little bit untidy and our hearts left as open. Amen, and blessed be.